booby traps, while ignoring the fact that the entire setup was still marked with the same bold red warning signs it had always had. Mark leaned against the fence, grinning like it was Christmas morning, and made a point of telling her that she really should have read the fine print on private property laws. The tension was thick, but it broke in a wave of murmurs and chuckles when Sheriff Daniels' familiar pickup rolled onto the street, his timing so perfect it was almost theatrical. He parked, took in the scene with one slow sweep of his eyes, and then walked over to Karen with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew exactly how this conversation was going to go. She immediately launched into her now familiar tirade, claiming I had trapped her vehicle intentionally, that the trap was unsafe, and that this was part of a campaign of harassment against her. Daniels listened, hands in his pockets, nodding slowly, before asking if she had ignored the multiple posted signs and previous legal warnings not to trespass or interfere with my gate. When she tried to dodge the question, he cut her off and told her point-blank that this was her second major incident in less than a month, and that while he could call in a tow for her, she was also dangerously close to facing charges for criminal mischief and continued trespass. The neighbors had started gathering by now, drawn in by the sight of her SUV hunched over the spikes like a wounded animal. Phones were out everywhere, and I knew the footage would be circulating online by nightfall. Karen's voice grew sharper, her hands waving wildly as she tried to turn the narrative back on me, but the more she talked, the more she exposed just how reckless and deliberate her actions had been. Daniels let her finish, then calmly turned to me and asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't answer immediately, partly because I was enjoying the spectacle and partly because I wanted her to sweat. I told him I would think about it, but in the meantime, I expected the HOA to formally acknowledge, in writing, that they had no jurisdiction over my property and that any further interference would be grounds for legal action. Karen tried to object, but Daniels shut her down, saying that given the history, that was a perfectly reasonable request. The tow truck that arrived this time wasn't the same driver from her last attempt, but from the way he eyed the damage and whistled low, I could tell he knew exactly what kind of repair bill she was looking at. It took nearly an hour to get the SUV safely lifted without causing even more damage, and during that time Karen stood off to the side, arms crossed, glaring daggers at me while pretending not to notice the steady stream of neighbors watching from a distance. When the truck finally pulled away with her vehicle, Daniels gave me a nod and said he'd follow up on the paperwork I'd requested, adding under his breath that maybe now she'd finally gotten the message. Later that evening, Linda came over with her phone to show me the video she'd posted to the neighborhood chat, complete with a timestamp and commentary pointing out that this was Karen's third public failure in a row. The comments section was a mix of laughter, disbelief, and outright mockery, with several HOA members chiming in to distance themselves from her entirely. By nightfall, word had spread that she had resigned as HOA president, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew it was less about choice and more about survival. I sat back on the porch, watching the last light fade over the hills, feeling the quiet settle in for the first time in weeks. The gate stood where it always had, unbroken, unbowed, and now completely free of the constant harassment that had surrounded it. It wasn't just a victory, it was the kind of win that leaves no room for a comeback, the kind where even the most stubborn opponent has to admit defeat, if only to themselves. Karen might still live somewhere in the neighborhood, but her days of running the show were over, and the spike trap, gleaming faintly in the moonlight, was a reminder to anyone else thinking of